The massive view screen on the bridge of the Allied Species Command ship showed nothing but destruction. Broken ships and debris floated everywhere, creating a graveyard of what was once the proudest fleet in the known galaxy. The swarm had attacked without warning, their crystal ships cutting through the Allied forces like they were made of paper. Admiral Tom Reed stood with his forearms crossed, his gray skin turning almost white with stress. The last 20 hours of battle had proven what everyone feared. The swarm was simply too powerful. Their crystal ships absorbed or reflected every energy weapon the Allied species threw at them. Their perfect formations moved like a single mind, which they were, making them impossible to outmaneuver. "Sir, we've lost contact with the third defense line," a young officer reported, his antenna drooping with exhaustion. "The fourth line is reporting heavy losses. We can't hold them back much longer." Reed closed all four of his eyes for a moment. After 30 years of military service, he had never imagined it would end like this. The Allied species, with all their advanced technology and tactical knowledge, were about to be wiped out by an enemy they couldn't even scratch. That's when the emergency transmitter crackled to life. "This is Captain James Walker of the Earth ship Thunderchild, responding to distress signal, requesting coordinates for immediate combat support." The bridge fell silent. Everyone had heard about the humans, the newest and most primitive species to join the Alliance. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, and their technology was considered crude by most standards. The idea that a single human ship could help in this situation seemed almost laughable. Reed grabbed the transmitter. "Captain Walker, this is Admiral Reed. The situation here is beyond desperate. We're facing a Class 1 swarm fleet. They've already destroyed 3/4 of our forces. I appreciate your offer, but one ship won't make a difference." There was a pause before Walker's voice came back, calm and steady. "With all due respect, Admiral, you haven't seen what a human ship can do yet. The Thunderchild was built specifically for this kind of fight. Send us the coordinates." Reed looked at his tactical display. The swarm was moving forward in their perfect crystal formation, their ships gleaming like deadly jewels in the starlight. In less than 2 hours, they would reach the civilian evacuation routes. He had nothing left to lose. "Sending coordinates now," Reed said, pressing the transmitter button. "But don't try to be a hero, Captain. If things get too hot, sag your ship. There's no shame in retreat against these monsters." "Understood, Admiral." Thunderchild out. 15 minutes later, space itself seemed to twist and bend as the human ship dropped out of FTL. Reed's bridge crew gasped at what they saw. Unlike the sleek, energy-efficient designs of Allied ships, the Thunderchild looked like a weapon made real. Its hull was thick and angular, covered in what appeared to be actual metal armor instead of energy shields. Strange rotating sections moved independently of each other, and multiple barrel-like protrusions stuck out at various angles. "What are those things on its hull?" Reed's weapons officer asked, adjusting his viewing stalks to get a better look. "According to the specs they sent us, those are called railguns and missile tubes, physical projectile weapons," Reed replied, still not quite believing what he was seeing. "The humans still use kinetic weapons in space combat." "But that's primitive," the weapons officer said. "Energy weapons have been standard for over 1,000 years." Before Reed could respond, the swarm detected the new arrival. 3 crystal ships broke formation and accelerated toward the Thunderchild, their energy weapons charging with deadly purple light. Reed held his breath, expecting to see the human ship try to raise shields or power up energy weapons of its own. Instead, the Thunderchild's rotating sections suddenly spun into new positions, and multiple small objects launched from its missile tubes. The crystal ships, programmed to defend against energy attacks, didn't even try to evade. Why would they? No physical object could move fast enough to hit a ship in space combat. They were wrong. The missiles accelerated far beyond normal physics, guided by simple but effective tracking systems. The crystal ships tried to shoot them down with energy beams, but the missiles were too small and too fast. Seconds later, 3 massive explosions lit up space, and where the perfect crystal ships had been, there was nothing but scattered shards. For the first time in 20 hours, Admiral Reed smiled. Maybe, just maybe, primitive wasn't such a bad thing after all. The bridge of the Thunderchild was unlike anything in the Allied fleet. While alien ships had holographic displays and neural interfaces, the human vessel's control center was filled with physical screens and manual controls. Captain Walker stood in the center, his hands gripping a metal rail as he watched the main screen. 3 targets down. His weapons officer, Mike Grant, reported with a grin. Looks like they've never dealt with guided missiles before. Walker nodded, but kept his eyes on the enemy formation. The swarm wasn't stupid. They would adapt quickly. Already he could see the crystal ships shifting, their perfect geometric patterns changing into something new. The remaining enemy vessels began to emit a strange, shimmering field. "They're learning," Walker said. "Scan that field. What are we dealing with?" The science officer, Lisa Brown, worked her console with practiced speed. "It's some kind of crystalline dust cloud. They're spreading it in a defensive screen. Our missiles won't be able to see through it." The swarm ships pressed their advantage, launching a barrage of energy beams through the crystal dust. The Thunderchild's hull rang like a bell as scattered shots found their mark. While the ship's armor held, the impacts were still fierce enough to make the crew grab their stations for support. Armor at 82%, the damage control officer called out. "We can't take too many direct hits." Walker smiled. "Then let's not give them the chance. Engineering, give me full power to the maneuvering thrusters. Weapons, load the special package we brought for this dance." Admiral Reed's voice crackled over the comm. "Captain Walker, fall back. The swarm's dust screen nullifies all known targeting systems. You can't fight blind." "Good thing we don't rely on targeting computers then," Walker replied. "Admiral, watch and learn how humans did it in the old days." The Thunderchild's engines roared to life, pushing the ship into a series of maneuvers that seemed random to outside observers. The swarm's perfect formation tried to track them, but their programming couldn't predict the seemingly chaotic movement patterns. "Ready on your orders, sir," Grant said, his hand hovering over a red button. Walker watched the crystal dust cloud, noting how it moved with the swarm ships. There was a pattern there, hidden in the chaos, just like the ocean currents he'd studied back at the academy. "Stand by. Stand by." The swarm ships suddenly aligned for another attack run. In that moment, Walker saw his chance. Now. Scatter shot. Full spread. The Thunderchild's railguns roared to life. Instead of missiles, they fired thousands of small metal balls, like an ancient shotgun scaled up to space combat size. The crystal dust could block sensors, but it did nothing to stop solid metal. The spread was so wide that precise targeting wasn't needed. Dozens of crystal ships shattered under the barrage. Their perfect formation broke apart as shards of their hull scattered through space. The remaining ships tried to reform their pattern, but the Thunderchild was already moving again, firing another spread from a different angle. On the Allied command ship, Admiral Reed watched in amazement. "They're using projectile weapons with no guidance systems at all," he said to his crew. "Like they're ancient naval ships fighting in fog. It's so simple, so primitive, and it's working." The swarm tried to adapt again, spreading their ships out to minimize the damage from scatter shots. But that only made Walker smile wider. "They took the bait," he said. "Load armor-piercing missiles. Target the isolated ships. Let's show them why you should never split your forces against a human opponent." The battle that followed was unlike anything the Allied species had seen. The Thunderchild moved like a predator, using the swarm's own crystal dust for cover, emerging to strike and vanishing again. Where alien ships fought with precise energy beams and calculated patterns, the human vessel used a mix of old and new tactics that seemed to make no sense until the moment they worked perfectly. More Allied ships began to move forward, inspired by the Thunderchild's success. The swarm's perfect formation started to crumble as they faced an enemy that refused to fight according to the logical patterns they understood. Walker watched another crystal ship break apart under his guns and thought about all the military history lessons he'd studied. The swarm might have better technology, but humanity had something far more valuable: thousands of years of warfare experience and the creativity to use those lessons in new ways. "Send word to the fleet," he ordered. "Tell them to watch how we move. Today, we teach the swarm why humans were the most feared warriors in Earth's history." The Thunderchild's success had changed the flow of battle, but the swarm wasn't finished yet. Their crystal ships regrouped into a new formation, this time creating a massive sphere of crystalline vessels. Energy beams crisscrossed space in a web of deadly light, making any direct approach impossible. "They're learning faster than expected," Walker said, studying the enemy formation. Sweat ran down his face as the ship's temperature rose from the constant maneuvering. "We need something they haven't seen before." Lisa Brown, working at her science station, suddenly straightened up. "Captain, I've been studying their crystal structure. Each time they adapt, their ships synchronize in a new pattern. But there's a 3-second delay between pattern shifts." 3 seconds. Walker's eyes lit up. That was all he needed to hear. "Engineering. How much power can you give me if we shut down everything except life support and weapons?" The chief engineer's voice came back instantly. "About twice our normal output, sir. But we'd be running dark. No sensors, no shields, nothing but manual controls and visual observation. Just like the submarine battles of old," Walker said with a grin. "Everybody hang on. We're about to do something very human." The Thunderchild's external lights went dark. All power diverted to its engines and weapon systems. In the darkness of space, the human ship became almost invisible compared to the brightly glowing crystal vessels. Admiral Reed's voice crackled over the emergency channel. "Walker, what are you doing? Our sensors can barely track you." "That's the point, Admiral. Sometimes the best move isn't to outfight your enemy. It's to make them fight themselves." Walker turned to his crew. "Ready for some old Earth tactics? We're going to play ghost ship." The Thunderchild accelerated straight toward the sphere of crystal ships, but instead of attacking, it fired a spread of missiles past the enemy formation. The swarm responded exactly as Walker had predicted, turning their attention to the incoming missiles. In those 3 seconds as they changed patterns, the Thunderchild slipped through a gap in their energy web. "Now we're inside their formation," Walker said calmly. "Fire scattershot in all directions. Don't bother aiming. Just fill space with metal." The railguns roared again, sending clouds of metal fragments in every direction. The crystal ships, packed tightly in their sphere formation, couldn't avoid hitting each other as they tried to dodge. Their energy beams, meant to fire outward, now risked hitting their own ships if they shot at the enemy in their midst. "They're breaking formation," Mike Grant called out from the weapons station, attempting to scatter. "Not this time," Walker said. "Launch all remaining missiles. Program them to track anything that moves away from our position." The Thunderchild became the center of a deadly web of its own. Any crystal ship that tried to escape the sphere formation was immediately targeted by multiple missiles. Those that stayed close were shredded by continuing railgun fire. The perfect sphere of crystal ships became a chaos of shattering vessels and expanding debris. On the Allied command ship, Admiral Reed watched in astonishment as his tactical display showed the swarm formation collapsing in on itself. "They turned the enemy's strength into a weakness," he said quietly. "The swarm's perfect coordination worked against them. They couldn't adapt fast enough when the threat was inside their own lines." The remaining crystal ships broke away in small groups, their perfect coordination shattered. The Thunderchild emerged from the debris field, it all scared but intact. Running lights came back on as power returned to normal systems. "All Allied ships," Walker broadcast on the main channel. "The swarm relies on predictable patterns and perfect formation. But humans, we write our own playbook. Follow our lead. Break into small groups. Strike from unusual angles. Make them fight our way instead of theirs. The Allied fleet began to move, splitting into smaller, more maneuverable units. Ships that had never deviated from standard combat doctrine started attempting unusual tactics, inspired by the human example. The swarm's remaining forces found themselves facing not one unpredictable enemy, but an entire fleet that no longer played by the expected rules. Walker watched the battle shifting in their favor and thought about all the human commanders from history who had won against superior forces by changing the rules of engagement. Today, humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or technology. It was their ability to think differently, to adapt, and to teach others to do the same. The real battle was just beginning, and this time, the Allied fleet was ready to fight like humans. The space around the battlefield had become a dangerous maze of floating debris. Broken crystal shards and twisted metal created a field of obstacles that would have made normal combat impossible. But Walker saw opportunity where others saw chaos. All power to forward thrusters, he ordered, guiding the Thunderchild deeper into the debris field. Behind them, 3 crystal ships followed, their energy weapons cutting through space, but missing as the human ship ducked and weaved between the larger pieces of wreckage. They're still following the same attack pattern, Lisa reported from her science station. The swarm ships always maintain equal spacing, even while chasing us. Walker nodded. The enemy's perfect formation was both their strength and their weakness. Time to use that against them. Mike, load the magnetic mines. The weapons officer's hands flew across his console. Mines armed and ready, sir. But in all this debris, their sensors will spot them instantly. They won't be looking for them where we're going to put them. Walker turned to his helmsman. Remember those videos we watched of old Earth drift racing? Time to put those moves to use. The Thunderchild suddenly cut its main engines. Using only maneuvering thrusters, the ship began to spin, its rotating sections moving independently. To the swarm's sensors, it looked like the human vessel had lost control, tumbling through space. The crystal ships moved in for the kill, maintaining their perfect triangular formation. That's when Walker sprung his trap. Release mines, full spread. As the Thunderchild spun, it released dozens of small magnetic devices. But instead of floating free, they attached to the nearby debris. The crystal ships, focused on their tumbling target, didn't notice their perfect formation was leading them into a minefield of their own making. The first explosion caught them by surprise. A mine attached to a large piece of crystal hull detonated, sending razor-sharp fragments in all directions. The swarm ships tried to adjust their course, but their rigid formation worked against them. Where one ship could have easily dodged, 3 ships moving in perfect sync could not. Direct hits on 2 crystal ships, Mike called out. The third is attempting to withdraw. Walker steadied the Thunderchild's spin with a quick burst from the thrusters. Not today. Show them why humans never waste good materials. Fire the grapplers. Long cables shot out from the Thunderchild's hull, electromagnetic heads seeking the metallic components hidden within the crystal ship's structure. The retreating swarm vessel, caught off guard by such a primitive weapon, found itself literally dragged back into combat. I don't believe what I'm seeing. Admiral Reed's voice came over the comm. You're using tau cables in space combat. Sometimes the old ways work best, Walker replied, watching as the captured crystal ship struggled against the cables. Especially when your enemy has never seen them before. All ships in range. Target the trapped vessel. Let's show the swarm what happens when they can't maintain their perfect spacing. The trapped crystal ship shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, did nothing against the physical cables holding it in place. Allied ships pounded it with a mixture of energy beams and physical weapons until it shattered, adding more debris to the growing field. But the battle was far from over. The main swarm fleet had regrouped, this time splitting into smaller units that mimicked the Allied fleet's new tactics. They were learning, adapting to the human style of combat. They're trying to beat us at our own game, Lisa said, studying the sensor readings. But there's something odd about their movements. They're still too perfect. Like they're following a program, rather than actually thinking independently. Walker smiled. That was exactly what he'd been waiting to hear. Send this to all Allied ships. The swarm can copy our formations, but they can't copy our creativity. Each of you, think of the craziest maneuver you can imagine. Something no sane commander would ever try. Then, on my mark, everyone does their own thing at once. Admiral Reed's voice came back, sounding both worried and excited. You want us to intentionally create chaos. Controlled chaos, Admiral. The one thing the swarm can't predict is what they can't understand. And trust me, they'll never understand why anyone would choose disorder over perfect formation. As the Allied ships prepared for their most unconventional attack yet, Walker thought about how far they'd come. The swarm had expected to face an organized, predictable enemy. Instead, they were about to experience something uniquely human. The beautiful unpredictability of individual choice multiplied across an entire battle fleet. The next few minutes of battle were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each Allied ship launched into its own unique maneuver, creating a storm of movement that defied any attempt at prediction. Some spun like tops while firing in all directions. Others cut their engines completely, drifting silent until they were in perfect position to strike. A few even used the debris field like a playground, bouncing their shots off crystal shards to hit enemies from impossible angles. On the Thunderchild's bridge, Walker watched the chaos unfold with pride. The Allied ships had learned fast, embracing the human way of combat with surprising enthusiasm. The swarm's smaller units tried to counter each strange maneuver they saw, but by the time they adapted to one trick, 3 more ships would do something completely different. Sir, Lisa called from her station, excitement in her voice. I'm picking up something strange in the swarm's command signals. Their response time is getting slower. It's like they're overwhelmed trying to process too many unique scenarios at once. Walker leaned forward in his chair. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. They're a hive mind trying to solve 1,000 different puzzles at the same time. Send this to Admiral Reed. Now is the time. Tell every ship to switch tactics. Whatever they're doing, do the opposite. Keep the enemy's processing systems overloaded. The space around them erupted in even more chaos as ships that had been charging forward suddenly reversed course. Ships that had been firing continuously went dark. The Thunderchild itself pulled its most daring move yet, cutting all power and drifting straight through the heart of a swarm formation before powering up again on the other side. Multiple crystal ships showing signs of confusion, Mike reported from weapons. Their formation is breaking down. Some are actually colliding with each other. The swarm's perfect coordination was falling apart. Individual crystal ships began moving erratically, their shared consciousness unable to cope with the overload of information. Some stopped moving entirely, while others fired at random, their energy beams hitting nothing but empty space. Admiral Reed's voice came over the comm, filled with amazement. I've never seen anything like this. Their entire command structure is collapsing. But Walker, watch out. The larger ships in the back are starting to move. I think we made them angry. He was right. From the rear of the swarm fleet, massive crystal vessels began to advance. Each one was at least 3 times the size of the Thunderchild, their crystalline surfaces glowing with stored energy. These were their command ships, finally forced to enter the battle directly. All ships, pull back and regroup, Walker ordered. Let's see what these big ones can do. The command ships moved forward in a perfect line, charging what appeared to be some kind of super weapon. The front of each vessel began to crack open like a blooming flower, revealing cores of pure energy. Energy readings are off the charts, Lisa reported, her hands flying over her console. They're going to fire something big enough to wipe out half our fleet in one shot. But Walker had noticed something during their approach, something that made him smile. They're still moving in a straight line, he said, still following basic combat programs. Send this to all ships. Full power to engines. Choose your target and charge straight at them. But don't fire. Not yet. Admiral Reed's voice crackled with concern. Walker, have you lost your mind? They'll destroy us before we get close. Trust me, Admiral. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And I'm betting those big ships never had to dodge anything in their entire existence. The Allied fleet surged forward, each ship picking one of the massive crystal vessels as their target. The command ships continued charging their superweapons, their formation unchanging. At the last possible moment, Walker gave the order that would change the course of the war. All ships, hard turn. Maximum thrust. Release all debris you've got. Every Allied ship suddenly broke away. But as they turned, they released clouds of scrap metal, broken crystal shards, and disabled weapons. The debris, carried forward by momentum, continued straight toward the command ships. The swarm vessels, too large and slow to dodge, couldn't stop their weapons from firing. Straight into the cloud of reflective material heading their way. The result was spectacular. Their own energy weapons, reflected and scattered by thousands of crystal shards and metal pieces, tore through their formations. The massive ships, built to project power but never designed to defend against their own weapons, began to break apart. Sometimes, Walker said quietly, watching the massive explosions light up space, the best weapon is your enemy's strength turned against them. The destruction of their command ships sent the swarm into disarray, but Walker knew better than to celebrate too early. The remaining crystal ships were gathering together, forming into a tight defensive ball. This wasn't just a retreat, it was preparation for something big. Sir, Lisa called out, her voice tense. Energy readings from the crystal ships are going critical. I think they're planning to overload their cores all at once. The explosion would take out everything within 1,000 kilometers. The Thunderchild's bridge fell silent. Even with their recent victories, they couldn't stop that kind of suicide attack. There were too many ships, too much energy involved. How long do we have? Walker asked, his mind racing through options. 3 minutes at most. Sir, even at maximum thrust, we can't get the fleet clear in time. Walker looked at his damaged ship's status display, paying special attention to the reactor readings. A plan started forming in his mind. The kind of crazy plan that only a human would consider. All hands, he said into the ship-wide comm. Battle stations, what we're about to do isn't in any manual. He switched to the fleet channel. Admiral Reed, I need every ship to fall back except the Thunderchild. We're going to give the swarm a taste of their own medicine. Walker, don't be a fool, Reed protested. Your ship can't survive a close-range battle with that many enemies. Who said anything about surviving? Walker's voice was calm. Just watch your sensors, Admiral. You're about to see why humans are so good at bluffing. The Thunderchild moved forward alone, its engines pushing to maximum power. The ship's reactor core temperature began to rise rapidly, warning alarms blaring throughout the ship. Engineering reports the reactor is reaching critical levels, Mike reported. We're redlining everything. Good. Make sure they can see it. Walker turned to his crew. Anyone who wants to evacuate, now's the time. What happens next is going to be pretty risky. Not a single crew member moved from their station. The swarm ships noticed the approaching vessel and its apparently failing reactor. Their tight formation shifted slightly, sensors focusing on the human ship that seemed to be about to explode. They're scanning us, Lisa reported. Reading our reactor output. Wait, they're actually slowing their own overload sequence. I think they're trying to figure out why we're doing this. Walker smiled. The swarm's greatest weakness was its need to understand, to analyze everything before acting. Send a fake distress signal. Make it look like we're trying to hide it. A burst of static-filled communication leaked from the Thunderchild's comm system. Reactor containment failing. Explosion imminent. All ships clear the area. The effect on the swarm was immediate. Their ships began to pull back, breaking their tight formation. The hive mind had likely calculated that the human ship's reactor explosion would trigger their own overloading cores prematurely, ruining their planned suicide attack. "They're retreating to a safe distance," Mike called out, "trying to get clear of our explosion radius." "Perfect." Walker's smile grew wider. "All power to weapons. Target their new positions. Show them why you should never trust a human who looks defeated." The Thunderchild's reactor warnings suddenly silenced as power was diverted from the fake overload sequence. Every weapon on the ship opened fire at once, catching the scattered swarm ships completely by surprise. Crystal vessels shattered left and right, unable to reform their defensive formation in time. "Allied fleet, attack now," Walker broadcasted. "Hit them while they're scattered." The Allied ships surged forward, their weapons blazing. Caught between the Thunderchild's barrage and the returning fleet, the remaining swarm ships found themselves in a deadly crossfire. Their carefully planned final attack had been completely disrupted by a simple human trick, pretending to be about to explode. "I can't believe that worked." Admiral Reed's voice was filled with awe. "You made them think you were going to accidentally ruin their plans, so they tried to avoid it, and ruined their own plans in the process," Walker finished. "Sometimes the best way to beat a logical enemy is to do something that makes no sense at all. They'll always try to figure out your reason, even when there isn't one." As the last few swarm ships frantically tried to escape, Walker watched his crew celebrating at their stations. They had faced an enemy with superior technology, superior numbers, and perfect coordination. And they had won using nothing but human ingenuity, unpredictability, and the willingness to try the impossible. The battle was over, but its impact would be remembered for generations to come. The Thunderchild floated near the Allied command ship, its hull scared and dented but still proud. Around them, cleanup crews were already at work, collecting valuable crystal shards and debris from space. Every piece would be studied, helping them understand their enemy better. Walker stood on his bridge, looking at the damage reports scrolling across his screen. The Thunderchild had taken quite a beating, but she'd given far better than she'd got. His crew worked quietly at their stations, the excitement of battle replaced by the satisfaction of victory. "Captain," Lisa called from her station, "the Allied Council is requesting permission to board. They want to see our ship for themselves." Walker looked around at his primitive vessel with its physical controls and solid metal construction. He smiled, remembering how dismissive some of the Allied species had been when humans first joined their coalition. "Permission granted. Let's show them how humans do things." The council members arrived in a sleek shuttle, led by Admiral Reed himself. The alien officials looked almost comical trying to adapt to the Thunderchild's artificial gravity, their various forms of movement clearly designed for their own ship's gravitational systems. "This is remarkable," one council member said, running 3 hands along a manual control panel. "Everything is so physical, yet it proved more effective than our most advanced systems." Walker led them through the ship, explaining the philosophy behind human space combat. "We designed the Thunderchild based on thousands of years of warfare experience," he explained. "Not just space battles, but every kind of combat humans have ever faced. Naval warfare, aerial combat, even ancient ground battles. They all taught us something valuable." "Like using debris as weapons," Reed added, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, "or pretending to have a reactor malfunction to trick the enemy. No other species would even think of such tactics." They reached the ship's main weapon control room, where Mike was running maintenance on the railguns. The council members watched in fascination as he explained how simple kinetic weapons had proved so effective against advanced crystal ships. "The swarm was perfect," one council member observed, "but perhaps that was their weakness. They had no concept of imperfection, of chaos, of doing things the wrong way to get the right result." "That's humanity's great strength," Walker said. "We're messy. We make mistakes. But we learn from those mistakes, adapt, and come up with crazy new ideas that just might work. We don't look for the perfect solution. We look for the solution that works right now. The council's leader, a tall being with silvery skin, stepped forward. Captain Walker, the Allied Species Council has made a decision. We want to establish a new training program. Every ship in the Allied fleet will have human tactical advisors. We need to learn your way of thinking. Walker nodded. He'd expected something like this. We'll help, but remember, the goal isn't to copy human tactics. The goal is to learn to think creatively, to trust your instincts, to try things that seem impossible. As the council members continued their tour, Lisa approached Walker with a datapad. Sir, long-range sensors show the remaining swarm ships have left the sector entirely. This is the first time in recorded history they've fully retreated from a battle zone. They'll be back, Walker said, but he was still smiling. And next time, they'll think they're ready for human tactics. But that's the beauty of our approach. There's always another crazy idea, another impossible plan, another way to do things that no one expects. Admiral Reed joined them, looking out the viewport at the Allied fleet. Ships of all designs and species floated together, many of them already modifying their weapons and tactics based on what they'd learned today. You know, Reed said thoughtfully, when humans first joined the Alliance, many thought you were too primitive to help in this war. Your ships were too basic, your weapons too simple, your tactics too crude. We were wrong. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, especially when combined with the courage to try the impossible. Walker watched as a group of Allied ships practiced a new maneuver, intentionally flying in random patterns instead of their usual perfect formations. The future would bring more battles, more challenges, but today had changed everything. The swarm had learned to fear not just human weapons, but human creativity itself. And that, Walker knew, was the greatest victory of all.